back to the Construction Hall of Fame podcast. Today we have Hedy Woodrow from Blue Heron. She's their president of the Atelier division and their chief client experience officer. And I think this is going to be a really fun one today with Hedy. So first of all, Hedy, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. I appreciate your time and I look forward to the next hour.
Definitely. So Hedy, as we like to do on this show, can you start by giving our audience a picture of really how you've gotten to where you are today, kind of the story behind your career?
Well, I've been extremely fortunate because I worked with some wonderful people, but I started my career out of college in retail and really started way back when as an assistant manager. Didn't know what I was doing, but apparently I had a knack for selling. And so was able to, within 6 months, get promoted to a store manager, moved me up to Oklahoma City, and then from there moved me out to North Carolina to a company that wanted to have 60 stores opened within a year and a half. And so I did that, and it was a tremendous learning because as you start to manage multiple locations, the opportunity to understand not only hiring great leaders and people, but also the opportunity to learn how to delegate. How do you empower your people? How do you delegate so that across 60 stores, there's consistency, both in terms of execution, presentation, the level of client service, and all of those types of things. So I would say that I learned very early on that that was something that should always be a priority, building a team of people, but also developing a culture so that you can also promote from within. I think it's a very critical skill set that one needs to have in order to really progress throughout their career. And I was very fortunate also that my father was a very big influence on myself. As I was initially learning how to manage, he would always say to me that it's absolutely critical that you tell somebody what it is that you need for them to do. You need to tell them again, and then you need to tell them a third time just to make sure that they fully understood what it is that you've said. And I have found that that has worked for me throughout my career. And so as I went through that process, there was an opportunity that back then I long admired, Victoria's Secret, and predominantly because it was associated with Limited back then. And Les Wexner was very much known for having very solid operations with all of his stores throughout North America. And so it was a tremendous opportunity. The level of execution was extremely strong, both in terms of presentation. So I was very fortunate that I was able to work with them and started out in Charlotte, North Carolina, covered pretty much the Southeast, moved a little bit into Tennessee, Atlanta, and so really had wonderful exposure to really a tremendous brand back then that really taught me the fundamentals of how important operations were, not only to develop and train your teams, but also to understand how to manage inventory and how to control inventory and make sure that across the Southeast that everyone had a very clear understanding of prioritizing how to manage through your inventory and train people in terms of the execution on how to account for it. And then from there, I was recruited out to Southern California, where back then the company was Sunglass Hut, and they were looking to expand into Japan. And so the regional that I'd worked with at Victoria's Secret recruited me out to Southern California. And from there, I was really able to be exposed to the Southern California market, which the interesting thing when you get into Southern California, you have LA, you have Beverly Hills, but then when you move down the 405, you also have Compton and you have Cerritos, and that is a completely different demographic all up and down the 405. So, I was born into a military family, so an Air Force brat. And I think while growing up, it was difficult. I think it later served me through management to have been exposed to various cultures, because certainly when you start to manage a team of people that come from various ethnicities and or backgrounds, it's absolutely critical that one, you understand who they are, where they come from, but also what their push points are, because it allows you to have a very highly productive use of your time, but also to respect who they are and what are those things that are really important to them, and how is it that you need to position things so that they understand what it is that you're looking for, and you can do it in a way that's very respectful of who they are as a person. So I was able to do that, covered Hawaii as well, which I think back then that was one of the big perks, I think, of wanting to take the opportunity. And then, of course, the opportunity to potentially expand into Japan. Well, then, I was living in Southern California, and the opportunity came to work for, back then, St. John Knits, which was founded in started by Bob Gray and Marie Gray. And that was probably a big turning point in my career because at that point, it moved me into more of an executive level position, running stores throughout North America, Canada, as well as Germany. But more importantly, it was working for a founder. And I was working for a founder that had taken a company from zero to $600 million. And when you work for people that are entrepreneurs, that are founders, that are very active as functioning CEOs as well, it's a whole different skill set. And it is the opportunity to not only learn from somebody who has a very special vision, and also in terms of how they founded the company, understanding also that they have extremely high expectations and the level of execution that you need to have in order to meet their expectations as a leader is paramount in terms of determining your success. So fortunately for myself, he mentored me. I never thought of myself as a VP because that wasn't, just for whatever reason. I just never thought I was either not qualified for it or it was just not something that I would even think of. But he had other thoughts. And so I remember just a couple of different moments where he had taken me over to the CFO because wanted to make sure that I learned financials to run a division, that type of thing. And what was interesting was that the CFO asked me what my markups were. And he said, well, surely you Keystone. I didn't know what the word Keystone meant at the time. And so I think I had a blank look on my face. And so then, of course, when Mr. Gray went back to his office, he called and he said, listen, he said, if you don't have an answer, he said, say you don't have an answer, but say you're going to get an answer in the next 20, 30 minutes or whatever that is, or by the end of the day. And so I learned that very early on, that it's better to say that you don't know something and to always be truthful and honest. And so from that, built a tremendous relationship with the Gray family. Was there when they took the company from public to private and then private to public. And that in itself is also a what tremendous learning as well as experience to have had. And so then, the Grays retired. And so it gave me an opportunity at the time to really start my own company. And so I founded a small doggy company. And because back then I lived in Newport Beach and everybody carried their dogs, and I really wanted to have that same level of quality that was made in Italy and that type of thing. So I did that and launched it in Beverly Hills and had great press. And so then the next day I flew to Dallas, met with the Neiman Marcus team, and they picked up the entire collection. And the next day flew to Italy, put everything into production. And the next thing I knew, I was kind of in business. And so I did that for a few years. And then a recruiter reached out to me to work at Mont Blanc. And I thought it's a great opportunity to kind of get back into that. And then also cover the Southeast, but still manage my company. But of course, obviously, I ended up slowing down my company and then focusing on, because within 3 months, they wanted me to move to New York and then oversee North America, Canada, and Puerto Rico. And so I was able to do that, and then had great success because there you were really developing, obviously, not only collectors for these writing instruments that were anywhere from 20,000 to 100,000. It also, during that time, they had launched timepieces. And so it was an opportunity to learn really about what is a watch versus a timepiece. What's the difference between a tourbillon? And then also they were very big because in the luxury arena, and certainly European, they were very big in terms of making sure that you were really able to, from a European standpoint, understand kind of the nuances of various cultures. So they flew me to Germany, and we did a whole etiquette school in terms of various cultures, how you give a business card, and just different things like that, and all the various touch points that one would do from a luxury standpoint. And so from that, I was able to then, I was in between Dallas as well as New York, and my father was diagnosed with lung cancer. So it was time to focus on family, and sold the house in Dallas, got rid of the apartment in New York, and moved in with my parents for about 3 months. It was during that time that the opportunity came up with the Win, and when they learned that I was in Las Vegas, they called, and so I went in, and I think back then it was 2009, 2010, so there was a few of those things going on. So I think they had 80 different candidates and got it down to 2. Then I happened to hit it off with Andrew Pascal, which was the president at the time, and Mr. Wynn's nephew. And so it was shortly after I started that I quickly determined and assessed that they had a tremendously over-inventory problem, as well as a few other things, because back then in the casino, they had a lot of company-owned stores. A lot of the stores weren't making money. Certainly, I wasn't tied to anything from an emotional standpoint. And when I speak to that, it was a culture back then that the Wynns, got Elaine Wynn and Steve Wynn, who were both married at the time. And unfortunately, at the time, they were also going through their divorce. And Elaine would always oversee fashion. And then, of course, there was changes that needed to be made. I partnered with Mr. Wynn as far as what the strategy would be in terms of turning not profitable stores into profitable stores, realigning the Esplanades, because when you looked at, how do you maximize sales per square foot, and what are those things that you can do to really ensure that you get the ROI that you're looking to do? There was a lot of stores that were company-owned stores that really didn't make sense, but you could certainly do far better by leasing this space. In addition, when you look at adjacencies, and this applies to really any business, you're not going to put a Ferrari dealership next to a Kia dealership. Nothing wrong with either the two of them, but obviously you also want to look for similar types of clients. And so I was really able to go through and realign all of the stores on the Wynn Esplanade as well as the Encore Esplanade, and the retail did exceptionally well. When I first took it over, I remember speaking with Mr. Wynn, and he was telling me that he remembered the days when it was 31% in terms of the net return. And for me, back then when I initially took it over, it was sitting at 17, 18%. So I thought, well, 31% is his number on the bottom line, then I'm going to beat that number. Mm-hmm. And so when I left 7 years later, it was at 41%. And the number had, there was a series of different strategies that were applied in order to get to that number over the years, watches and jewelry, and really everything that I had learned, I would say throughout my career, really prepared me for the Wynn. I like to say that Bob Gray was my undergraduate in working with founders and CEOs. And then when I worked with Mr. Wynn, that was definitely your graduate, because you really had to know your business. You had to really understand exactly who your client was and the luxury touch points that needed to take place along the way, certainly from a resort, a 5-star resort, and everything was evaluated on an annual basis to maintain those 5 stars. And that was consistent both in terms of the food and beverage and spas and all of those types of things in the rooms, as well as retail. And so when you have a grouping of stores, again, it goes back to the very early days of my career, which was hire and develop and coach a wonderful team of people, identify and make sure that they really understand what the long-term strategy is, and that it is a privilege to be a part of a team that really understands how to achieve that. And as a leader, to inspire people to achieve things that perhaps they've never thought they would ever achieve. And that's one of the greatest things I think about being a leader, is the opportunity to mentor people and to really develop a strong group of people that strive for results. But not only that, they strive to go above and beyond what the expectation is. So what I love about being client-facing and also client experience is having the opportunity to exceed clients' expectations. And so during the time at the Wynn, or that I was at the Wynn, it was not only realigning and resituating a lot of the retail, as well as negotiating and working with all global brands in terms of their leases, making sure that the adjacencies were correct so that Chanel and Hermes sat next to one another and all of those types of things. I also had the opportunity to brand. And back then we had, obviously Boston was coming online, Macau, Cotai, of course, Las Vegas. And the uniforms were a little bit different with each location. And so as Mr. Wynn and I got together, it was really important to ensure that there was consistency across all properties with the front desk check-in and different areas of the business that would be very distinctive to the Wynn. And so had a wonderful opportunity to work on that as well. And then also had the opportunity, because we were bringing in so many global brands, to work with Roger Thomas, who's an award-winning and has been recognized in Architectural Digest for all the properties that he's done for Mr. Wynn, as well as his personal residences. And he and we collaborated together. There wasn't one store that went onto the Wynn property or Macau or Cotai without both he and I approving both the fabrics, the finishes, and that type of thing. And then once he and I did, we then went into Mr. Wynn with whether it was an architect or a designer, and gained Mr. Wynn's approval as well as his wife, Andre, at the time. And then from that, started to get involved in a few other things from an interior design standpoint with Roger, but also as the store started to come online in terms of, it was also working with their construction teams, and it was really coordinating the schedules because, as you can imagine, in a five-star property, you can't just have them work at any time of day. They have to work after hours. And so really coordinating all of that with all of the various global luxury brands was also something that was very special. And, obviously we had a Ferrari dealership back then. We had a Ferrari store. And so really traveling for me back then was very global because of the fashion. I was in Paris and Milan with the team. And then, of course, Ferrari, that was once a year. And then, of course, we had watches and jewelry, which, of course, was Basel, Switzerland, and Geneva. So that for me was just a tremendous opportunity to not only be exposed to really every luxury global brand in terms of both their corporate offices, the experiences that they provided when you came in, whether you're a buyer, whether you're a client, the events that took place, gave me a profound foundation, I think, to prepare me for Blue Heron. And I was very fortunate it's funny because initially when the recruiter had called me, I didn't think I would be the proper fit for what Blue Heron was looking for. But then the more that I spoke with the recruiter, and then of course I met with Tyler Jones, which is the founder of Blue Heron and CEO, it then occurred to me that a lot of the background that I'd had from previous would also apply to what it was that they were looking for here at Blue Heron. And so 2 years ago was when my journey started with Blue Heron. I was able to bring really all of the experience that I had throughout my career and bring it to Blue Heron, starting with interior design and overseeing the interior design studio. And back then there was just a tremendous opportunity to start to really elevate the experience that both the client had as well as manage their expectations, but set their expectations also in terms of what it was that they were going to experience throughout their journey. And for me, what was really, really a wonderful thing is that I came in, I completely redesigned with a team of designers, but also worked with a lot of the vendors to have this studio remodeled. So I did that within 60 days. Worked with a lot of worked with the art gallery as well as a couple of artists to bring in a lot of fine art. And, when you're working with this level of client, many of them are art collectors. So there's nothing better than when they're coming in to see their home being designed or have a presentation to also experience fine art through the studio in a very private fashion. So thus began the partnerships that I've had with many of the fine artists or artists that produce fine art. We still do decorative art as well, but the fine art, of course, is very special. And we've sold a considerable amount out of just the studio. And having the interior designers be able to be exposed to that and be able to access that is something that is also a big plus. And so that occurred and was able to really start to focus in on the client, because I think when I first came, a lot of the interior design was just that. Whereas one of the most crucial things that you can do as you start to work with a client is to really understand that client. Because, luxury is never really about the things that you need. Luxury is really about detail. It's about all those touch points that you bring that you pick up from a client. It's the environment that you create for them to experience when they're coming into the office. It's all of those little things that will make a difference in terms of whether it's touching one of their emotions or whether it's creating a memory. And that's one of the things that I like to really impress upon the team, the design team, is that we have a tremendous privilege when we're working with clients at this level, because we are going into their homes, we're going into their lifestyle. We're determining and we're helping them and guiding them in terms of what that home could potentially look like. And when you start to think about it from that perspective, the second thing that I do that I think has worked very well is I really like to stress to the teams that when a client chooses to work with us, not only is it a tremendous privilege, it is no different than when they're purchasing, whether it's a Blue Heron home, whether it's an exotic car. They're investing. And so when they move over the monies that they do to have their home completely redesigned, or whatever that might be, that is an investment that they're making into our decisions. We have a tremendous responsibility to understand what their budget is and to always come in on budget and full transparency along the way. And that's a key thing, I think, in business, is that not only is it important to have the transparency with clients, it's important to have the transparency with your employees. Employees, in order to be motivated and to stay motivated, always want to be part of a winning team, but being a part of a winning team is a responsibility that each leader has to make sure that there is complete understanding of the strategic goals, the direction, but also providing feedback to those employees along the way. It's coaching their performance and to ensure that they can be the best that they can be and provide feedback when needed. And so that role, of course, then evolved into president of Atelier as well as client experience officer for the company. And the beauty of being the chief client experience officer for the company is that in itself is touching every touch point throughout the company and identifying at what point do we as a company and or an employee touch that different individual. One of the things I learned from Mr. Wynn very early on is that it is the last person that touches that client that sometimes is the most important and most valuable employee of the day. And why is that? Because a person and a client could have had this wonderful experience throughout their meetings and all of those types of things, but now they leave and the valet happens to not be so nice or not be as cordial and that leaves a lasting impression. And so one of the foundations, I would say, of the win is that there's a very clear expectations that's set through the orientation that we all have a responsibility to make sure that the client experience, regardless of where they're at in their journey, it falls on each of us and the shoulders that we have. And so bringing that to Blue Heron so that the internal and the external client experience is consistent throughout. And when I speak about internal client service, in corporations, oftentimes various divisions and or departments, I've completed my work, so I'm good. But the reality is that you want to make sure that you complete the work in order to set the next team up for success, which means that whether it's a 3D model that needs to be fully complete, whether it's completing on time so that the home can start on time and or the design process can start on time. Everyone has a timeline, but they need to be very mindful of because when you're on time, it sets the next team up for success so that they can execute and do their jobs on time as well. And, then when you take that externally, the client has every touch point as well that they're looking for one to be not only transparent, but also to hit the dates that we've committed to. It really is the full circle when you start to really think about the client experience. The installation team that goes in and starts to install, the construction teams that are building these homes, those teams also have to be very client-centric because oftentimes clients like to have a wonderful relationship with whether it's the project manager or the project supervisor that's building the home after they've come out of design development. And so there's a team of people that is so critical to a client's experience and journey throughout that responsibility is one that all of us shoulder and take very seriously at Blue Heron because Blue Heron isn't just a home builder. It is a brand. It is a brand that is highly recognizable here in the Las Vegas Valley, but certainly from a lot of various residents that are now moving into Nevada. And whether it's California, Canada, Oregon, Washington, all of those states which are coming into Las Vegas pretty heavily, if they're looking for a luxury home and or a custom built home, the first place that they call is Blue Heron. And when you look at the website, it really speaks to the beauty, the biophilic design of what the founder, Tyler Jones' vision as well as intention has always been. So the responsibility with the interior design team then becomes to ensure that there is a consistent and cohesive story throughout that home so that it respects the DNA of the brand from a biophilic standpoint, but also marries well into that client's lifestyle and what it is that they're looking to experience within the home as well.
Wow, what a career arc. So interesting, really, how you've gotten to where you are today. And something I find very interesting is reverse engineering success, right? And we've got a lot of early career professionals who listen to this show. For me, when I started my career, I was a baseball player my whole life, played through college. I like to think that I kind of studied baseball and played school. I wasn't really all that into the academic side of things, although I did graduate, but baseball was really my thing. And so I graduated, I was so green. I was on the baseball side, I felt like I hadn't achieved my full potential, right? I had all the intangibles to be a professional baseball player. I can make excuses. There's no reason for excuses. The bottom line is I wasn't drafted after my senior year of college. And so I sat back and I thought to myself, I didn't achieve my full potential. This doesn't sit well with me. I want to make something great of myself and of my life and to build something for my future family that I can be proud of. And so I just started on a very hungry mindset, right? Sales was kind of the background I got into. Sales and marketing was my first couple jobs. And I'm actually selling home improvement, window and door renovations, exterior renovations was my first job out of school. But along the way, I did definitely have an entrepreneurial bug. I tried different ventures, but ever since I graduated, my mentality was I want to be investing in myself consistently. I want to find the best mentors, the best consultants, the best trainers to just really help me level up in various aspects of the business side and the personal side that can help me become the best version of myself. So it was very intentional, finding the right mentors, the right coaches. So for me, it started from a mentality of hunger. And I think mindset is so important when you look back and you think, how did I get to where I was today? And in your case, something I thought was interesting was how much you moved locations. I find that's not an option many people consider. You know, they're rooted to their local hometown or wherever they went to school or wherever they end up finding themselves. And making that move can be a pretty big consideration for a lot of people, but it seems like you attack those opportunities and you continue to find ways to work alongside mentors who could help you level up, help you learn. I guess, what was your mentality starting your career?
I think, to be really honest with you, for whatever reason, and I honestly don't know because it's even to this day, I'm fearless. When it comes to a challenge, I don't care what the goal is, I'll beat it. I don't care what the challenge is going to be, I'll figure out a solution. And I don't know if that comes from, the way that I was raised, but it's something for me that has always, I guess, followed me throughout my career and as I've approached things. But I also think it's something that allowed me to have success with people that are founders of companies who found a CEO of a company that they founded versus a CEO of a corporation. It's two different skills. It's two different types of personalities. It's two different skill sets that are being utilized. We read all the time that sometimes there are CEOs that they're founders of companies, but once it reaches a certain level, whether it's 60 million or 100 million, they then start to either move up or else back away and then bring in somebody from an operational standpoint. And so for me, I think the ability to be able to work with someone like a Bob Gray taught me a tremendous amount. But I also knew too that it was an opportunity for me to learn from somebody great. And so whatever it was that I could do, and we happened to have a great relationship because I knew that he was a driver of the business. I like to drive a business. If I've got a P&L or a financial, I'm going to double it. That's just who I am. There's never a number that isn't too high for me. I'm going to go after it. Because I also know too that in order to achieve great numbers or exceed great goals, it's about really having a great team of people that you surround yourself with. It's about hiring leaders. And it's really identifying positions within the organization and what is the skill set that's going to really be required. Because oftentimes we see some companies where people get promoted because time, whatever that might be. And oftentimes we sometimes will do ourselves an injustice. We do an injustice to the employee if they're not ready for the position. And so it's absolutely critical that, not only, is there the job description, but then the job description has to be extended to what is the skill set that's needed from a leadership standpoint in order to ensure that when this person moves into this role, they can execute and they can accomplish the results that are needed for this particular position to be successful. And I think that for me, that's the one thing I probably learned from Bob Gray, which was very quick on really identifying and helping me to identify who are the ones that are really going to take the hill with you, who are the ones that are going to go above and beyond and exceed the expectations that are given. So, it's funny because years and years ago, I'd always heard about hooking your wagon to a rising star. And I have to say, I do think that is kind of true because my career took off when I started work for Bob Gray. Then because of the elements and the things that I learned from him, I was then able, when I came to the Win, to really apply that, but then also to understand what it was that and how to manage up to, whether it's a very strong personality. Here's a person that's, worth more than, a few $1 billion. So, oftentimes they will have people around them that sometimes will tell them what they want to hear. And I've never been, for whatever reason, and I guess it goes back to fearless. For me, I've just always had an attitude of, if I'm going to work for somebody as a leader, then I have a responsibility to make sure that I always tell them the truth, which sometimes they may or may not want to hear it, but it's more important that you function with integrity and honesty, because in the end, they will always respect the fact that you're giving them the truth, because it allows them to make better decisions. And I think the other piece of it for me is that I also learned that if in fact you have an idea or you've identified an opportunity within the organization, instead of just presenting the opportunity, present 3 solutions, which is something that I also like to teach my teams, is that there's always a better way to do things and everyone is always very open to them. But when one does bring that up, let's also identify 3 different solutions in terms of how we can better improve, because chances of that getting a yes at some point, one of the 3 is going to be pretty good. But the other piece of it, the other reason I like to reverse engineer it, is because I like to see how people are thinking. What are the things that they're looking at, as from an employee standpoint, because it also, that particular skill set will also help you to determine whether or not that person is going to be ready for the next step or the next position. Do they have the leadership skill set to move forward? So there's a couple of reasons why I do that, but I would say, for me, I think I've always approached everything just, extremely fearless, and probably going back to the fact that I moved around quite a bit when I was younger, growing up with my dad being in the Air Force. I guess after, you learn that you become a chameleon. You're adaptable to any market, any country. And for me, that has served me well throughout my career.
Quick break from the show to share a word from our sponsor, Big League Talent, your trusted partner in AEC recruiting. If you run a construction, architecture, or design firm and you're turning down work or stuck in delays because you're short on the right people, you're not alone. Big League Talent offers a white glove experience to help AEC companies recruit and retain top-tier professionals who align with your culture, so you can grow confidently. We dig deep into your story, identify what makes your firm unique, and present your value to the market by targeting candidates who match your needs. You'll get a short list of vetted leaders, fast. It's discreet, strategic, and hands-off for you. Firms like Dowbilt, McCarthy, and Sullivan Design Studio trust us when hiring can't be left to chance. Whether you're hiring now or planning ahead, we're here to help. To strategize on hiring, book a discovery call with our CEO via the calendar link in the show notes. Now back to the show.
It shows. I'm curious, what got you into the world of luxury experience in the first place?
So it's interesting because, when I worked for St. John Knits, that was probably my first exposure to luxury. And what I mean by that is that, we had a fleet of, Mr. Gray had a company that was private jets. And so, obviously when we traveled throughout North America, we always went on the corporate jet. So obviously you start to get exposed to that. And then, of course, he had one of the largest yachts in Newport Beach. And so whenever I would entertain clients to come out for the fashion show, all of that was made available to myself. So you learn pretty quickly. There's different opportunity from the lifestyle standpoint, but also when you start to get into that world, you also start to see the various touch points. What are the differences between just flying a regular airplane versus a private airplane? And then within the private airplane, what are the types of things that they're doing from a catering standpoint? What about the logo, the branding, all of those different types of things you start to really observe and you start to get exposed to. And then, of course, St. John was considered a luxury brand back then. And so you're throughout North America, you meet a lot of people, both through events as well as clients of the store. If their spend is $250,000 or $300,000 on their wardrobe, then usually it's a high-end client. And so there's a responsibility that one has to deliver a level of service through your teams that meet that client's expectations. Then, of course, as traveling throughout, staying at, whether it's a 4-star or 5-star property, you also start to see the various brands in terms of those different touch points and what are the things that they do, the scent, the flowers. When you go to the George Sankin in Paris, it's very distinctive in terms of the floral arrangements. Well, then you learn that it's Jeff Leathan that's doing the floral arrangements, does it for all of the 4 seasons. And so, but that's that one distinctive thing that a lot of people who stay there at a 4 Seasons understand and know that they're going to experience this beautiful floral moment when they walk into the lobby. And so then when you start to think about scent and all of these various touch points in casinos, there's a lot of scent that will come in through the property, but there's a very distinctive types of things. And then when you start to think about branding, and you start to think about way back when Weston, they were known for their beds back then. Well, they were one of the first ones that started to brand their beds, and then of course started to sell the linens and all of those different touch points. And so you pick up all of that throughout the years. Then when I came to the Wynn and I started to work with literally every global luxury brand, because when you think about a casino property has, thousands and thousands of SKUs that your divisional merchandise manager is overseeing and managing. Then, you've got the whole branding aspect of all of the, whether it's, 24-hour clothing stores that have a lot of the branded merchandise in it, whether it's ready-to-wear T-shirts, hats, soaps, you name it. You get exposed to that, and you start to understand that that also has to be aligned with the five-star hotel experience. So, then, of course, working with every global brand, literally traveling all over the world and staying at the various hotels, as well as going to their corporate offices and experiencing the various meetings that one would have, and what are the touch points that they're bringing to really highlight who they are as a luxury brand. I had a meeting years ago in Japan with the CEO of Mitsukoshi. And what was interesting about that particular meeting is when you're going into the conference room, the size of the conference room, the tea ceremony that takes place, all of those things. And then just the presentation when you go to Japan in terms of the attention, the care that they take on that small, minute detail on the ribbon, how the ribbon's tied, how the tissues come together in the back, all of those touch points, that's true luxury. And that's something that, I truly enjoy, grown to not only appreciate, but respect as well.
You are so right. The luxury world, especially luxury building, luxury design, it is so important to have those details ironed out and not to overlook things that might seem small to someone. But to your point, it's looking at every step of the process, every step of the experience, and saying, how can we make this the best experience possible for them? Really great point. What's interesting to me, it's a non-traditional career path into a leadership role within a residential design build firm, right? From what I know, you didn't go to school for design, right? Right? Didn't go to school for design. You weren't technically a designer earlier in your career, but you did have so many experiences that could lend to be helpful in a position like this. From your perspective, how did your background in luxury retail, hospitality prepare you for leading in a luxury residential design build firm?
I've actually also been very fortunate that I've also built a lot of my own custom homes. And so I've worked with interior designers as well as construction teams and that type of thing in terms of building my own custom home. And so I'm very particular, but also I learned design from Marie Gray, who's the founder of St. John Knits. And it's interesting because regardless of what industry you're in, there are certain basic elements of design that apply through every industry. Balance, symmetry, where does the eye go? What's the focal point? What colors are going to resonate, which lighting is so critical and all of those types of things, fabrics, the quality of the fabrics and, how something is made, the quality of construction, all of those things. I would say that throughout the years that I've worked with in my own personal life, as well as obviously my professional life, I would say really prepared me for that. And then of course, from Marie Gray, from a design standpoint, at the Wynn, working with Roger Thomas was like a graduate degree because he's brilliant. Not only has he been globally recognized, but the opportunity to work and to learn from someone like that's better than school. It's kind of like sometimes they say, if you travel the world, sometimes that's better than going to college for that particular. Well, again, extremely fortunate that working side by side with great people and designers such as Marie Gray, as well as Roger Thomas from an interior standpoint, that in itself really resonated for me. But it also paired well with the fundamentals that I already knew and things for myself that I've done in my own homes. But then as I've studied various hotels around the world, various properties that Steve and Roger had designed together, all of that exposure prepared me really for what I'm doing today here at Blue Heron.
It definitely makes sense when you connect the dots. Interesting. What was it about Blue Heron, the challenge, the opportunity that made you say, this is the right next chapter for me?
One, because I always enjoy working for founders of companies. I think that that's probably, something that I enjoy the fast decision-making process. Sometimes in corporate, you got to go through a lot of different layers. And that's, to me, when you have to go through a lot of different layers, it holds up the process, and business has moved on way beyond that. And sometimes in business, you need a decision to be made at that moment in order to push forward to get the results that you're desiring to get. And so I saw Blue Heron early on because I'm a golfer. And so one of my girlfriends, we were golfing out at Dragon Ridge, was pointing out this Blue Heron community that was being built at Dragon Ridge. And then over the years, I would just see this growth that it appeared this company was having. And so then when the opportunity came up, I started to associate what I had been experiencing and watching, and then of course went to the website, and then of course once I met with Tyler, the opportunity I thought was tremendous. And I say tremendous because the brand as a whole, even though he's gone from zero to where he is today, which is amazing in 20 years, the opportunity to take this to $1 billion company is within reach. And that's where, for me, I looked at it as a tremendous opportunity to be a catalyst and to help him to be help myself to be a driver for what his vision is. I love those types of opportunities. And so when it was presented to me and, went through the process and that type of thing, I really saw it as something for me that I can be passionate about, be a great brand ambassador for, and to really be a part of something that I believe is going to be really quite extraordinary.
Well, based on your track record, I would say if you hear the number $1 billion is possible, you're probably shooting for $1.5 billion.
Oh yeah, always.
Love that. Okay, so your work is really rooted in, as you would put it, elevating every moment of the client journey. What does that look like practically for a luxury homeowner?
For a luxury experience here at Blue Heron, it really starts with, whether it's the client intake at the sales team's office, offering them a beverage. It's really looking at the verbiage in terms of how one speaks to a client. It's also looking at how something is presented. It's how beverage is offered. And it's also how one presents, because all of that really ties into the expectation that client has to the brand. And so it's helping people to understand that they are a representative of this 5-star brand that's being grown and developed into something that's even greater than what it is today. And so helping people to understand that and realize that. And then, of course, once the client comes into one of our conference rooms and or the corporate office to really experience Blue Heron, that in itself becomes a tremendous opportunity for the receptionist to warmly greet, but also to know in advance who is coming, who are these clients, what is their background, so that we know before they arrive what they prefer in terms of coffee or tea or cream and sugar, those small elements that come with hosting somebody for the first time. And then, of course, when they come into the conference room, having the conference room set up a certain way. I'm very big in terms of everything has to be spotless and clean and organized. And food presentations, because we do a lot of lunches, breakfast, charcuterie, and that type of thing. That all has to present a certain way. The plates have to be aligned a certain way. The cutlery, all of those types of things kind of really, I get to the nth degree in terms of detail. But I also think that this level of client, that's what they experience when they're purchasing a Ferrari. That's what they experience when they're going to the Chanel store. All of those things have to be parallel that we offer here at Blue Heron. And so, as that client goes through that experience, we're picking up whether it's their plates or their cups or offering an additional beverage and those types of things. We work with a chef to prepare things. We like to ask and find out in advance what the client's preferences are, whether it's for lunch or whatever that is. When we do celebrations, we'll find out if it's red wine, white wine, champagne, or non-alcoholic that they prefer. When we're celebrating their final design presentation and when they're getting ready to move into construction, and we're making introductions to the rest of the team also. And then, of course, we have a whole gifting touch point as well for our clients. And I like everything to be curated. So for me, I go back to what's called discovery. And it's really, discovery to me is really about relationship building. It's about building relationships with clients, because when you can do that and you can start to establish trust as well as credibility with the client, that will carry them through their journey, because there will always be bumps in the road. That's just the nature of business and certainly the nature of construction or any of those types of things. But at the end of the day, when you have a great relationship with a person, you can have, and you're transparent with the communication, you're always honest, then it doesn't matter how much money a person has. Everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. And so everyone deserves honesty, transparency, and consistent communication throughout their journey.
Such a key role that you play in this team. I'm thinking off the top of my head, two immediate benefits that would come from your position in creating this experience is, first of all, owners, clients at this level, they're doing pretty well, right? They don't always pick the contractor just based on the lowest bid. They
That's
look
right.
at an experience. So I could see you optimizing the company's close rate, right? How many clients do you
Yeah.
get versus how many do you close? And on top of that, I could see this leading to a significant amount of referrals because it's thin air, right, with this level of clientele. And I find there's often some connectedness. So
There's a
I'm
lot.
sure that this is driving a ton of benefit to Blue Heron.
It is. And, the client experience and, I think the combination of understanding construction as well as understanding design. Oftentimes, when a sales counselor is working with a client, that client may have some apprehension or questions because they just don't know. But when I have the opportunity to go in and to meet with the client, and help them to really understand what the process is and what it can become and all of those types of things. That rate of closure for me, I can sit at 99 to 100% for sure. So the opportunity to grow this company exponentially is key, and building teams of people that understand. But also, I'm fortunate because I've traveled around the world. So literally I can talk to any client that's been various parts of the world and be able to either remember and or associate a hotel and a particular bar that they really like that they want to have in their home or whatever that is. But those things for me are kind of easy. And so to your point, the conversion rate becomes very, very critical and a huge focal part of what it is that we're doing today. And we're finding that it is definitely increasing by having that entire focus on the client experience.
Not surprising. When it comes to trust, you talked about trust. How, from your perspective, do you build deep, long lasting relationships based on trust with these very discerning types of clientele?
Honestly, I go back to honesty because, one, you do have to be able to, and they have to see you as someone that can understand their lifestyle, but also understand what it is that they're looking to accomplish and to achieve. But then you also have to have a level of credibility so that they can feel confident that what it is that you're saying to them is also going to be something that you're going to execute on. So when they start to see that level of trust starts to build. And, keeping that level of trust means constant execution on doing what you say you're going to do and do it within the time frame you say you're going to do it. And if not, follow up and make sure that they understand and know potentially what the time lapse is, why, where it's at, and all of those types of things. That starts to build trust in an immeasurable way. And those are the things that, I really take pride in. And for me anyways, it's something that I work and strive for. And because of that, I have friends all over the world, friends that at one point were clients, but today, very close friends. But it's those relationships that, one, I value. The other piece of it also, that at this level, the level of trust is also established by the fact that they know you don't talk. And that's one of the things, that we all value our privacy. And certainly when you get to this level, you're dealing with celebrities, VIPs, and that type of thing. They want to know and they want to feel confident that what it is that you're doing within their home and or just within the relationship as a whole or spend or any of those, that it goes no further than the room that you two are in. And so that's another piece of, I think, building trust that becomes really paramount to any relationship. And honestly, whether it's a personal relationship or whether it's, at a professional level, I do believe very strongly that trust is the foundation of any great relationship that is out there, whether it's personal or professional. Honesty and then transparent communication. So consistency in action. When you tie all of those things together, it's a great formula for lasting relationships that last throughout the years and through the bumps in the road that might come along the way.
Follow through. Completely agree with that. Give your word and live up to your word. Actually follow through on what you said you were going to do. And something that I think is interesting, and to get a little contextual with it, is the honesty piece. I find, and I've been fortunate to work with some very successful individuals. Right now I'm working on about a it's going to end up being north of $100 million project in Miami with a very successful client. He's actually engaged me personally, so I've gone through working with his team. And what I've found is people at this level in life, they're often surrounded by yes people, people who say yes to everything. There's
Yep.
a yes man is the term that people coin this a lot. But I found that being willing to be honest and sometimes say no, but no backed by real consultation, real
That's
industry
right.
knowledge. They find that so valuable. And I found that it helps actually build trust where you think they just want to hear yes to everything. Sometimes showing a different perspective can actually show your value a little bit more.
That's right.
Yeah. So, getting a little bit more into the nitty gritty, what details, touch points, behaviors do you see make the biggest difference when serving this level of clientele?
I think, to me, it's how you greet them. It's the fact that they feel that you're willing to take the time sometimes because, obviously when you get to the higher levels, they're working with your staff or whatever that is. But I think when they know that you're willing to take the time, whether it's to come to their home to celebrate the home installation or whatever that might be, I'm always available. And I think that that's the piece that I always make sure clients know. I'm almost always in on the first meeting, and then we'll check in throughout the way. But the client always knows that if they ever have a question, they're not getting an answer, they can always fall back to myself. I'll get them an answer. And that's true as they go through, their journey throughout the company, not just something that might fall under design or fall under, another area of the business. And so that for me, I would say, if anything, is the one key driver that makes a huge difference for clients when I'm working with them that they know separates us from the rest of any other company.
It's interesting how business like this applies to recruiting. Oftentimes, I find my clients value the same thing in me. They value honesty, they value transparency, they value follow through, they value me being accessible, right? Like me being on call, being there to support them. Maybe
Yep.
odd hours, that's completely fine for me, but I find that they do appreciate that, right?
Mhm.
It's the holistic
Right.
experience that we can provide someone. Very interesting. Okay. So diving a little bit into building internal culture, right? Like a culture of excellence. What do you think makes a creative team thrive, not just deliver, but on the design side, right? On the creative side, what do you find helps teams excel?
I think, to be really honest with you, you hire people that are passionate about what they do. When they're passionate about what they do, then they never look at a clock and they only want to strive for excellence to exceed that client's expectations or their supervisor's expectations. But I think it goes back to hiring the right teams up front. And when you can take a team of people, and every now and then you inherit a team and they're not all going to be on board, but if you can get a few of them on board and then the people that you start to bring on really exude and embrace the strategy and the culture of what it is that you're looking to create, that in itself will start to turn the wheel on others that maybe have been a little bit more apprehensive. And then in the end, when people start to see results come through, they now then get a taste of success. And that sense of pride of ownership and that pride in being an ambassador for an amazing brand becomes very real for them. And, I truly believe, and I think it's something that Steve Wynn really taught is, when people feel good about themselves, that is reflected to the client. When I was designing uniforms for the Win, at the very end, it went down to the final approval process, which was kind of the presidents of the company and, of course, Steve Wynn. And he would always want an employee to model the uniform. And what's interesting is at the very end, whether it was, restaurant, whether it was VIP or concierge, whatever that was, or hostess uniform, at the very end, he would ask every one of them, do you like it? Would you wear this if you weren't at work? And if the answer was a resounding yes, it went through because he was a firm believer that when employees feel good about themselves, they're going to exude that to the client. And what's interesting is he would always say also is that, I can build a beautiful building and it could have the best marble and everything else. But honestly, that building is nothing if you don't have a great team of people that brings it to life, that embraces every client that comes through and is dedicated to exceeding that client's expectations and creating a memory that will always bring that client coming back.
Said the word great. You said the word right team, great team. That means different things to different firms, right? From your perspective, what do you look for in a great hire in building the right team?
My biggest thing is I like to hire passion. And I hire passion because those are people that absolutely love what they do. They're going to jump through hoops. They don't look at a time clock. It's really about how do I exceed expectations? And then if it's a leadership role, I'm always looking for people or leaders that really understand how to build and drive great teams of people to great results. I think that that's one of the things that, as I said earlier, is that, there's job descriptions, but then in a lot of companies will hire to the job description. But you also have to understand what are the nuances of the job description in order to be successful? What does that person really need to have from a skill set standpoint to be truly successful and to be able to execute on what it is that that job description requires? And so having that skill set identified from a leadership perspective becomes very, very critical on whether or not that person's going to be successful. The other piece of it also is that you have to really understand the culture of where they came from, and then whether or not that's going to be a culture that aligns with the current culture that the company has. Culture is critical because, you can be truly a great, successful employee, executive at another company, but then come to another company whose culture is completely different, and for whatever reason, the skill set that they have and or the ability to transition is just never happens because either they're too stuck on their previous company and how it was done, and that was the right way, so therefore that was the only way. We oftentimes like to say, bring us your cup of experience and then we'll fill it, with Blue Heron or Win or whatever that is, that company that you're working at. But that is one of the most important things that employees need to have when they start with a company is that client's hiring them because of their experience, the opportunity, obviously, of what they can bring to the brand, but also the employee has the responsibility to understand the DNA, the culture, and the people that are within the organization first. And when they start to really embrace that and come in with an open mind and a mind of listening and learning in the beginning, then in the end, they'll be able to execute and develop a great strategy, execute quickly, but have a team of people behind them that supports them.
Point you made, one that's often overlooked from my perspective, is analyzing the past culture of where they've been, because there's one of two scenarios that could play out successfully. Either they're in a culture that is the opposite of yours. Maybe there's some challenges they're not happy with, and they know they want to get away from that culture and into something more like Blue Heron. Or it's a well-aligned culture and they're similar, and they just find the opportunity with Blue Heron to be more exciting, to be a better move for their career. So I think that's an astute point, and one that gets overlooked frequently is looking at the culture, because we can look at a resume, we can look at a project list or a portfolio and see, okay, have they done similar work? But the fit with the team is so culturally dependent. I think that gets overlooked a lot, and it's sharp that you consider that. Definitely. I think the client experience and delegating the client experience to someone else on the team is something that I see the founders or principals of smaller firms have a hard time letting go of. How do you empower your team to deliver an exceptional client experience, to really maybe own the client experience if it gets to that point?
We do, and we monitor our NPS scores, Net Promoter Scores, and it allows the client to give feedback, but also it allows to identify training opportunities, both for employees as well as is there another way that we can do something better? And I think when you look at a lot of founders sometimes where it's hard for them to let go, I'm going to go back to trust. It's understanding and anticipating what that leader is looking to achieve. And what are the things that you can do and or how you word something that allows them to experience that if it is going to be delegated, it is going to be executed in the same level, in the same fashion. When you can gain the trust from the owner of a company, that's when you can really take off. I had to build that trust with Gray very early on. I built that trust with Steve Wynn very early on because that level of execution, if they've never experienced it before from whatever position that you're holding or responsibilities that you have, it allows them, and then you back that up with results, whether it's results on the P&L in terms of looking at the financial and all of those types of things. That's critical. I can tell you that, when I first went to the Wynn, because of everything that was happening with, Mr. Wynn and Mrs. Wynn at the time, the changes that I was making, of course, for Mrs. Wynn, who was overseeing fashion, retail, and horticulture and all of those different things, certainly did not sit well. And so it was me understanding the dynamics of what I was walking into, understanding that I had to be transparent constantly with Steve, so he always knew what it was that I was doing and where I was and strategy and all of those types of things. And what ended up happening, which is really interesting, is that it was a little rocky for myself and Elaine Wynn in the first couple of years. But what ended up happening was that our offices were situated right next to one another. And the moment that I read about in the papers where she was coming off of the board, and she came, and so I was in the there was 3 or 4 of us senior execs that were there when the announcement was made and the board was there and all that type of thing. She came back up to her office. And it was at that point that, we embraced and we connected. And what was interesting is through all that, even though she never said, she then later told me and has told me over the years prior to her passing recently, was that she always looked at the results. And she always, when she went into those board meetings, she was seeing the results that were being produced by the changes that were being made strategically. And it was from that point that she knew that what I was doing, even though it was changing, what it was that she was doing was delivering for the company as a whole, which in the end, that's really what it's about. And she then became my second mom, I would say, from that. So it was rocky at first, but then the results really drove the relationship, I think, towards the end. And then we established just a great friendship, and she was a tremendous mentor for me, and I learned a lot from her. I learned a lot. Yeah. It was, but that for me, I think, describes trust. And then, of course, on the flip side of the coin, when you look at Mr. Wynn and it was paramount that I really built my relationship with him also, so that he really trusted what it was that I was doing in the beginning. Because when I developed the strategy for the Wynn way back then, it was completely different than how they were functioning and operating their business from a retail standpoint. And I think back then I would say that 60% of their stores were company-owned stores with not making a ton of money and some losing money, to where we transitioned it to where I would say today it's probably 10% of the properties, and 90% of those are leased.
Interesting. What do you think makes Blue Heron a place that top caliber talent wants to stay and to grow with?
I think this is an incredible company, I think, in terms of what Tyler has built from a culture standpoint. I think people see the architectural significance of what's being done here in Las Vegas. In addition to that, when you look at, it's called Vegas Modern One, which is a home that he built about 5 years ago, it's changing the landscape of this entire city. And when you look at it from that perspective, what a tremendous opportunity to be able to work for a company that is not only changing the landscape for Las Vegas from a home building standpoint, it is also building a brand. It's also having an active founder, CEO, leader that's actively involved in the company. And that's something that I've always enjoyed. So, I experienced that at the Wynn, I experienced that at St. John, and I'm experiencing that here. And I just thoroughly enjoy companies that are dynamic, that move through things very quickly, make quick decisions. We don't rest on our laurels. If we see an opportunity to become better, it's what we do, versus going through a series of approvals and people and that type of thing. We just deliver and make the results happen.
Speaking of delivering and making the results happen, Blue Heron has grown, right? They're continuing to grow. And I know that in this world, you're only as good as your last project, right? Mm-hmm. It's about excellence on every single project, from design, conception through completion. What is your approach to scaling excellence without compromising the person?
I think it really boils down to communication, and I think it also boils down to inspect what you expect. So you've got to set the expectations, ensure that everyone understands what the expectation is and what it is that we're looking to accomplish and to achieve, and making sure that they understand that they're an integral part of execution, of ensuring that we're delivering on our brand promise. And so, I think that that's one of the things that it's absolutely paramount that you work with each one of the employees in the company, but you're constantly communicating, you're constantly making them aware and rewarding excellence in public and making sure that people are being recognized for that outstanding experience that they gave to a client.
I was talking with a firm owner out of, I believe it was Miami, about a week ago. And he said something that I found interesting. I'm curious sort of how you approach not the positives, but maybe some of the challenges. This individual, he would have a once a week stand-up meeting with the team in which they would review a mistake or a challenge that could have gone a little bit better. It's almost like I completely agree with rewarding the positive, rewarding the success. Do you have any aspect of the team that focuses on maybe highlighting a challenge, or I guess how do you work through ensuring that challenges or mistakes is a better word, ensuring that mistakes don't repeat themselves?
I think one thing that's really, really critical is identifying that a mistake is a mistake only if it's made twice, right? So you're always going to have one along the way, but it's also the opportunity for us to take a look at it and learn from it. But also it's gathering the group of people that you have and soliciting for solutions. And I think that the more, if you're in that type of a situation where you can gather that group of people to help and to suggest solutions as we really think through this potential disappointment that a client had or a challenge and or a problem that came along the way, collectively as a group, let's talk about it and let's come up with suggestions and or solutions that we can all take a look at and identify which is the best path for us to go to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And I think that the more that you can gather the team together to do that, then there becomes a sense of ownership. When people have a sense of ownership in terms of a decision that's being made or a change in policy or whatever that might be, that in itself results in people that feel that they're part of something great. And that is the end goal, to do that.
From your perspective, when it comes to the luxury market, right, how are you finding that client expectations may be evolving or changing?
I think that when you're meeting with somebody, you can really start to identify maybe what some of their expectations are. I mean, certainly in the home building business and or in real estate, you have it when it's a buyer's market versus a seller's market, and you start to identify those various push points, if you will. And so when you can start to really understand where that client's coming from, because one of the challenges when you're dealing with a home that is a semi-custom home and that semi-custom home is priced in at 10 million or 14 million, that level of client that's purchasing that home is oftentimes used to having custom homes. So if they want to push a wall or move a wall, they can do that. But then you're getting into structural and all those types of things. And so it's really helping that client and really observing from that client, what is it that they're looking for? What are their touch points and push points and emotional touch points? But it's also being proactive in identifying if they want to move a wall, what are the things that one does? Because you never want to say no, but in the end you are saying no, but you're doing it in such a way where they buy into your no and understand it. It's all psychological.
What role would you say emotional intelligence plays in your leadership type of position in this design space?
It's extremely important. I would say emotional intelligence and really understanding personalities, understanding people that you're working with and what their expectations are and all of those types of things. Understanding where people's emotional touch points are that are employees, that is absolutely critical. Managing up, whenever I tell my teams of people oftentimes that managing up is really, really critical prior to going into a meeting. It's really understanding what is the agenda that you want to review and what you want to discuss. What are the anticipated pushbacks that potentially may come up? And then preparing yourself with whether there are 3 solutions and or suggestions that one might have, but it's also communicating in a very concise fashion so that you're in and you're out and you're respectful of one's time, but you're able to get your point across. That, is a skill set that I think leaders have to have in order to be able to move through an organization and move through in a way where they're achieving results along the way.
Interesting. Okay. So as we wrap the show, I've got a couple questions that I'm curious on. First is, what is one trend in the luxury interiors design space that you're leaning into and one that you're intentionally resisting?
Well, we definitely are not trendy. So we won't, go into any types of the trends and that type of thing. And a lot of that too is because Tyler is not a trendy, type of a person when it comes to designing and building his homes. But the other thing also is that luxury truly is about timeless luxury is kind of what our approach is also. So from an interior standpoint, we really try to stick with going back to this is an investment for these clients. I will utilize a lot of neutral shades when it comes to a lot of their interiors, whether it's furniture, those types of things. I bring color in through whether it's art, fine art, and or the accessories. Excuse me. And so with that being said, that's one of the ways that we will transform a home in such a fashion to where it's still classic. If they wanted to, let's just say they wanted to sell the home in a week, they could easily sell the home by taking out the accessories and any type of personalization of photos and that type of thing. But their investment will continue to increase. And that is the one thing that Blue Heron is known for, is that the value of the home, once it's purchased, will usually go up around 20%. When you start to put in interior design, you're certainly guaranteed that 20%, if not more.
That's a heck of a value prop there, strictly from an investment perspective. Yeah, even if it's not a personal home, even if someone's looking to make a strategic investment, they could buy a Blue Heron home, turn it around for 20%.
That's why we have a lot of clients that they purchase a home, they live at a home, but then they'll purchase a second and a third throughout the city as an investment.
Interesting. So, last question, Hedy. What's one habit or system you've built that's had a huge impact on your team's success?
That's had a huge impact on what?
On your team's success.
Oh, on team success. I would say, if anything, I'm a regular communicator. So for me, communication is key. And I think that when I first came on board, it was every Monday gathering everyone together and to really identify what are the things that went well last week? What are the things that, are opportunities that we see as this week? What are those things that collectively as a team we can work together to ensure that we do execute in the fashion that we do? Constant updates on a weekly basis of here's the goal, here's where it is that we need to push towards. White glove service throughout every step of the way, certainly through installation as well. So all of those things, I would have to say, are things that I've imparted, I think, since the day that I arrived, that has resulted in some very nice, successful situations.
Love that. Love it, Hedy. Well, I'll just say it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. It's been so insightful. Your responses are really thoughtful, and it's, clear why you've been able to get to where you are today in your career.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for joining me on the show. I appreciate that. And I'm sure my audience is going to love this one. So again, pleasure, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.